Welcome to the Music of Murder by Merle Chadwick, narrated by Mitchell Larson. Published by BrooksAudiobooks.com. All rights reserved. No portion of this audiobook may be reproduced in any form without written permission of the publisher. Visit BrooksAudiobooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks, and be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 1. A brand new 750 Derby, just purchased that afternoon and already in need of reblocking. Timothy McCarty, a former roundsman whose shift to civilian clothes was still fresh enough to bring him satisfaction and cause headaches for his tailor, shrugged his broad shoulders and marched determinedly through the relentless downpour. He had stepped out for a walk to clear his mind of the psychological nonsense he'd been reading, and he was going to take that walk. But he had a few choice thoughts on where this cursed rain could go to be truly appreciated. Drops trickled down onto a soggy bit of tobacco that hung, forlorn, from his mustache, and muddy splashes hit nearly up to his knees with every step he took. The area around him was rough. Broken, narrow sidewalks, run-down tenements, and filthy wooden shacks populated the streets, all growing more wretched as he approached the river. Here, looming warehouses stood resolutely against the darkening night sky. It was barely 9 o'clock, yet there was hardly a light visible, save for the irregularly spaced street lamps that cast a dim glow, amplifying rather than alleviating the thick darkness. Still, McCarty pressed on as if he was strolling through a once-familiar neighborhood. He wasn't the only one out and about in the late September storm. Under the flickering glow of a lamp, he spotted a dark figure also making its way to the waterfront, and instinctively he quickened his pace. Something about the man's unsteady gait sparked a suspicion in him, more than mere curiosity, a skill that had served him well during his days on the force. The man was stumbling along, at times breaking into a shaky trot, then abruptly stopping, only to plunge forward again, weaving through the driving sheets of rain. McCarty kept a close distance behind. He was just about to catch up when a tall figure in a blue coat suddenly stepped out from the shelter of a doorway and blocked his path. "None of that, young man. What's your business following that fella there?" "Good heavens, it's Ty." "Isn't that the truth, Jordan?" McCarty replied, their hands locking in a firm handshake. "You're quite the conscientious fellow, I'll give you that, keeping an eye on the old-timer who got you onto the force, just because he's enjoying a leisurely walk on a night like this." Officer Terence Keenan chuckled sheepishly in the shadows. "It is a lovely night, indeed, for ducks," he corrected with a grin. "You're no old-timer, Ty. From what the guys say about the cases you've quietly taken on since leaving the department, but there's no need to mark me for checking you out just now. You know this area as well as I do, and when I see a guy dragging a well-dressed drunk toward the riverfront and the docks, it's up to me." "A drunk, is it?" McCarty shot back, his tone full of disdain. But then he paused and gestured toward the greenish glow from the twin lights across the street. "I was planning to take a stroll through my old beat and drop in at that house over there to chat with you and the lieutenant at the desk when I spotted the guy ahead. But where'd he go? He couldn't have slipped into one of those warehouses at this hour, and there's nothing else between here and the corner." "Ah, let him go," Officer Keenan chimed in good-naturedly. "Honestly, Ty, I don't have the heart to bring them in these days, especially when the stuff is so hard to come by." But McCarty wasn't paying attention. Forgotten were the tattered Derby and the comfortable life it had recently represented. He was back on his old beat with a sense of purpose, grabbing his fellow officer by the arm. "What's that over by the lamp-post, half in and half out of the gutter? That's him, Jordan, he's down. Let's go." Jordan needed no further encouragement. They ran together, splashing through puddles and navigating the uneven, crumbling pavement until they reached the man lying there. He had pitched forward, his face dangling over the curb's edge, right into the swirling gutter below. The back of his head revealed a bald spot catching the faint light from the lamp. "He's got some weight to him," Jordan grunted. "Now I'll have to haul him in for safekeeping. What's he babbling about, Ty?" Together, they turned the man who lay sprawled on the ground, struggling to breathe and muttering to himself between ragged gasps. The young policeman's flashlight illuminated a heavy, smooth-shaven face, distorted and pale beneath the streams of muddy water running down it, with small, close-set eyes darting wildly in a glazed stare. McCarty leaned closer, trying to make out the hoarse words. His partner remarked with disdain. "He's worse off than I thought. Look at his rolling eyes. I'm betting it'll be Bellevue." "Quiet," McCarty commanded, as he lifted the man's head higher onto his knee. His breathing was turning into a series of desperate gasps. Then, without warning, they stopped altogether with a final, rumbling exhale, the loose jaw sagging as his eyelids drooped. "Not Bellevue, Jordan, more likely the morgue," McCarty said solemnly. "He's gone." "Dead," Jordan jumped up. "It sure looks that way. I'll dash over to the station and alert the lieutenant and call for an ambulance. You'll stay here." Without waiting for an answer, he turned and splashed heavily across the street to the station house. McCarty glanced down at the figure still resting against his knee. In the faint glow of the street lamp, it looked like the man was wrapped up to the neck in a loose, dark ulster made of some thin fabric. The body was portly, but not quite stout. The upturned face, now clear of the gutter's muck, was a grey blur, its grotesque features relaxed into a mere flabby mass. The involuntary movement of the supporting knee caused the head to droop forward onto the lifeless man's chest, revealing once again that small, round, bald spot gleaming white against the sparse dark hair around it. "Mike Taggart, he's a lieutenant now, as you may have heard, says it's fine to take the body over there instead of waiting out here all night for the ambulance." Jordan had ploughed back through the foul mud. "He'd like to speak with you too, Ty, so can you help me with the old guy here? It's just a short walk." With a slight shrug and a smile that didn't quite reach his companion, McCarty took hold of their limp burden. Together, they carried it across the street to the station house. He squinted against the sudden brightness as they laid the sodden figure on the floor, then turned to greet the sturdy, well-groomed young man who had stepped forward from behind the desk. "So it's Lieutenant Taggart now. He was just a rookie when I left the force," McCarty exclaimed with a chuckle. "I plan to drop by some time, but not as part of the escort for our friend here." He gestured over his shoulder at the body, and the lieutenant shook his hand with clear respect before moving closer to examine it. "Good to see you, McCarty, though you're certainly bringing in unusual company," he smiled, and then addressed Officer Keenan, who had knelt and was methodically searching the lifeless form. Quite the well-to-do fellow to be found hanging around the waterfront on a night like this, isn't he? What do you find, Jordan? Can't say I recognize that face from this precinct." As the policeman handed his superior the contents of the dead man's pockets, McCarty stood lost in thought, staring down at him. He appeared to be in his late 40s, his robust, closely shaven face possibly flushed with color from the life he had led. His nose was short but elegantly arched, and as he blinked awake, his small, pale eyes revealed a dull, vacant stare. His raincoat, made of fine material, was opened for Jordan to search through, revealing a dark brown sack suit and a tie that matched in quality but not in flair. In stark contrast, the low brown shoes covering his large, somewhat flat feet were surprisingly cheap and glaringly brand new. The man's hands lay limp, palms up, with thick but well-kept fingers curling slightly. McCarty narrowed his keen eyes as he observed them before turning away. "Lieutenant, I think I saw his hat get blown off into the gutter while we were carrying him over. Should I go fetch it while you and my friend Jordan here check his things?" "Please do, McCarty." The lieutenant glanced up from the desk, where he and Keenan were sorting through a collection of small items, a bit distracted. "Make sure to have a look at these when you return." McCarty nodded and set off on his chosen task, picking up the flashlight the policeman had left on a chair. He crossed the street, estimating the distance from the lamp-post to where the fallen man's head had rested at the curb, and followed the rushing water in the gutter for several yards until he reached the old warehouse. There, the murky stream was momentarily halted by a pile of debris. Stuck on a barrel stave, he found the soaked, misshapen brown mass that used to be a soft felt hat. Collecting it, he carefully examined the inner side of the crown with the help of the flashlight. The gold lettering indicating the maker on the sweatband was too waterlogged to read, but two initials shone clearly in the tiny beam. B. P. With his trophy in hand, McCarty returned to the station house to find Keenan and his superior huddled together over a keyring. There's the hat, or what's left of it. He dropped the soaked item beside the body on the floor as he spoke. Jordan here saw the guy walk by and says he was completely drunk, so it's likely there won't be much more to this once his family takes him from the morgue. But if I'm needed to testify that it was bootleg liquor and not the usual stuff that got him, Inspector Lucien or any of the old crew at headquarters will know where to find me. I'm heading home now. I'm soaked to the skin. Take a look at these first, McCarty, the lieutenant urged. Drunk or not, I'm going to figure out what this guy was doing in my precinct. If that jewelry is fake, it doesn't match the rest of his outfit, and if it's genuine, why was he wandering around here wearing it? Don't even joke about him depending on us for protection. You walked your beat here yourself in the past, and the area hasn't changed much. What do you think? McCarty casually examined the items put before him, his expression critical. Handkerchief, kid gloves, a Wareham gold-filled watch, a pigskin cigar case with 2 broken cigars inside. $70.80 in change, McCarty listed quickly. Nothing marked and no letters or papers right. That scarf pin and those cuff buttons, whether fake or not, look like cat's eyes to me. Is that everything besides the keyring? That's it, but if this guy intentionally left off anything that could identify him to whoever he planned to meet, he made a mistake. Look here, Lieutenant Taggart exclaimed triumphantly as he sorted through the assortment of keys on the ring, revealing a small, thin disc of aged metal. One side displayed the number 4, while the other was engraved with 3 letters in old-fashioned script. NQM. McCarty's stubby mustache quivered slightly as his lips pressed together, but he shook his head. What is it? He asked. It looks like one of those identification tags in case he loses his keys, but if NQM are his initials, what does the 4 mean? The young lieutenant looked at him with a hint of pity. It wasn't meant to be an identification tag for just anyone who might find these keys, McCarty, but it will tell me much more than just who this fellow is and where he lived before I'm done. I hope so, lad, McCarty replied, still shaking his head. But when they claim the body, you'll probably find he was Neil Quinn Malone, walking delegate for stevedores, Union Number 4, down here late for a date after dealing with some bootleggers' distant cousins. There's the ambulance, Jordan suddenly called out as a bell rang down the street. His honest face flushed, his tone a mix of patience and embarrassment. Well, I'll step outside, boys, and into the rain, McCarty said, sternly holding back a grin. I'm chilled to the bone, which isn't helping my rheumatism, and I don't need some young doctor in a white coat to tell me that guy is dead, even if he doesn't have a mark on him. Good luck to both of you. He made his way into the storm, bowing his head against the heavy rain and chuckling as he turned up the collar of his coat. The good lads back there would think that a few years of easy living had gotten the better of old Ty, making them believe he was finished. He wasn't laughing when he stepped into a cramped little lunchroom a few blocks away. As he stared down at his coffee cup, his expression revealed more uncertainty than the steaming brew warranted. He was done, though not in the way that Jordan and Taggart might imagine. He would never again meddle in a case that belonged to the department he had left behind. The methods had changed too much since his day when an undercover cop would track down his suspect, or find himself called in to explain why he hadn't succeeded. It was bad enough when headquarters began filling up with all that scientific crime-solving nonsense imported from foreign police forces. Now they were opening a school to teach this dark art called criminal psychoanalysis to a bunch of fine young detectives who needed nothing more than the sharp wits and strong bodies that God had already given them. It was his own secret and somewhat embarrassing interest in the few books on the subject he had managed to collect that had sent him spiraling into confusion earlier that very evening. Well, let them psychoanalyze whoever carried that strange tag on his key ring. And yet, It was a unique case. McCarty's eyes sparkled, and his nostrils flared with excitement as he thought of the possibilities. Once he finished his coffee, he took the nearest subway to the rooms above the antique shop, where he lived a solitary bachelor life. He expected to find his place empty as usual, but to his surprise, he noticed a faint light glowing behind the shades of his front windows. Unlocking the door with his key, he was met with a particularly foul stench of tobacco that wafted down the narrow stairway. There wasn't another pipe in the world that smelled quite like that one, and as he bounded up the stairs, he called out, "Max, I thought you were on duty at the firehouse," but there was no reply. He reached the top of the stairs and stopped in disbelief at the entrance to his worn but cozy living room. Marcus Riordan, the engine driver from the local firehouse, and his good friend, since they had arrived from the old country, was completely unaware of him. He lounged in the low Morris chair with a book in his hands, his long legs shifting restlessly, while his lantern-like jaw was set in a painful expression of deep thought. "Max, get a hold of yourself," his oblivious host ordered. "What in the world?" Max came back to reality with a jolt. He dropped the book and sat up quickly, his eyes blinking in confusion. "So you're back," he said, still dazed. "It's no wonder I haven't seen much of you lately since you've taken to reading. Up until now, newspapers were all you cared about. So here I am, using the latchkey you gave me, thinking I'd get out of the rain while I waited for you, and I find these books. Man, they're amazing. But what do they even mean? I have no idea, and I'm starting to doubt that the guys who wrote them do either." McCarty's tone was almost angry as he carefully set his soaked hat on the mantel and peeled off his dripping overcoat. "Which one had you sucked in?" "The Diagnostics of Penology." Max picked up the book again and struggled to read the title. "I thought a diagnostic referred to a non-believer, and that you found religion in your old age, but it turns out it's all about the different kinds of criminals." "I never realized there was only one. A criminal." "Neither did I." McCarty lit a cigar, lost in thought. "But there has to be something to it. That's the whole idea the commissioner wants to instill in the guys down at headquarters with this new approach of his." "Really?" Marcus replied, a note of disbelief in his voice. "So you're saying that when a crime happens, all they'll need to do is sit around and determine if the perpetrator was a lunatic, or if it was something innate, habitual, or just a one-time lapse. And what about the criminal in the meantime? He still needs to be caught." "It might not make sense to us, but it's worth a shot. The commissioner wouldn't be bothering with it if he didn't believe it could help," McCarty insisted, his loyalty evident. "Some of the guys who haven't made it to headquarters yet could really use a lesson in thinking for themselves, I reckon." The enthusiasm in his voice made Marcus sit up straighter in his chair, his mild grey eyes bright with curiosity. "Who's messed up this time?" he asked, his tone sharp. "I should have known you wouldn't be out in the storm this late just for your health. What's going on, Ty? For heaven's sake, are you working another case?" "I am not," McCarty replied with dignity. "I'm a property owner now, as you know, with no ties to the police department anymore. If a worn-out man drops dead in front of me and ends up in the morgue, labeled an acute alcoholic, it's no concern of mine." Marcus dumped his pipe's ashes into the tray and stood up. "So where do we start?" he asked eagerly. "Thank goodness I have the next 24 hours off. Should we have a word with his family first, or what?" "No way. This time we keep to ourselves." McCarty gestured toward the chair. "Sit back down and light up, Max, and I'll fill you in, though I don't have much to go on from Jordan Keenan and Mike Taggart." "Jordan Keenan and Mike," Marcus complied, albeit with tension. "That'll put us down in the old precinct, then, by the waterfront. Who was the guy, and what was he running from when he collapsed?" McCarty shared a clear account of the night's events, making sure not to leave out any details. When he finished, his visitor paused in silence for a moment, processing the information in his not-so-quick mind. Then he spoke. "I really don't get it, Ty. A well-off, middle-aged man who looked respectable, according to your description, and not a scrap of paper on him to identify who he was, just that little metal tag. He must have been fleeing from someone. Did you check behind you? I did not, and neither did he. McCarty took a moment. Keep that in mind, Max. I didn't say he was running from anyone. The way he was sprinting and then stopping, only to stagger forward again, showed that if he wasn't half out of his mind with pain, it was sheer willpower that pushed him as far as he got. When Jordan and I turned him over, that greyness in his face came from more than just a failing heart. There was terror in his eyes. He was conscious, too, even as he took his last breaths, muttering something. Do you think he might have been trying to reach someone down by the wharves that late and ran himself to death getting there? Marcus's pipe had gone out in his agitation, and he set it on the tray with a shaky hand. Was it blackmail? Did he believe whoever was waiting would kill him if he didn't show up? Ty, what kind of man was he? Well-tailored clothes alongside cheap shoes, elegant jewelry, and a gold-filled watch available on the installment plan. And the cigar case was made of genuine pigskin, you say. But what sort of cigars were inside it? Max, you've stumbled onto something brilliant, even if you don't realize it. McCarty looked for a moment at his old friend with a mix of affection and unflattering surprise. The cigars were Coronas, the finest and most expensive available. Although the clothes were of exceptional quality, they didn't quite fit him. They had been carefully altered, but were originally made for someone taller and slimmer, and they showed signs of wear. Only the cheap shoes were new. And while the cufflinks and tie pin looked as opulent as anything a high-society gentleman would wear, they were fakes, even if I wouldn't give Taggart the satisfaction of saying so. His shave was too close, remember, and his hands showed no sign of hard work. Don't read too much into it. He could wear another man's clothes, though not those shabby shoes, smoke his cigars, imitate his jewelry, keep his hands soft. No, it doesn't add up, not at all. Marcus shook his head slowly. You're hiding something, but why do you fixate so much on his close shave? What about that number 4 on the other side of the tag with his initials on the keyring? Did you check to see if the same initials were in his hat? It had fallen into the gutter when he went down. McCarty had chosen not to mention his task of retrieving the missing hat just yet. Did I mention that NQM were the dead man's initials? I concocted a made-up name as a joke when Taggart was so confident about it, but it could also be an address. You know this town as well as I do, Max. Have you ever heard of New Queen's Mall? I have, Max replied. You're talking about that one block stretching from the park to the next avenue, with gates closing it off at both ends, as if the families living in the houses on either side think they're too good to mix with the rest of us. It's right in the heart of the millionaires section, surrounded by the highest society, and it was named after some fancy place in London, wasn't it? McCarty nodded. That's right, the Queen's Mall. The Burminsters came from there and own most of the land on both sides of this block. The big mansion on the north side, closest to the park, is where they live. They went to great lengths to shut the street off with gates, and the families in the other houses were all for it. The newspapers kicked up a fuss about it being a public road and how it went against democracy, but that small group of millionaires got their way. That was long before you and I arrived in this country, Max, but the inspector filled me in on it, and it still comes up from time to time during election season. Number 4, New Queen's Mall. Marcus cut in sharply as he emptied his cold pipe, stashed it away, and checked the clock. It's 20 minutes to 11, and here you are giving me a history lesson about New York. What are we waiting for? Chapter 2. At the corner, the 2 self-appointed investigators found a taxi, and for once, Marcus took charge and insisted they get in. McCarty was vocal in his objections to this venture, but talking about the strange incident at the waterfront had stirred up a long-suppressed desire to dive back into action. Even though he felt a deep resentment toward the changes at headquarters since his time, the allure of the mystery pulled him in with undeniable strength. He would never admit this to Marcus, though, and as they bumped along the road eastward through the park, he grumbled. You must have lost your mind, Max, and I'm no better for letting you drag me out on a night like this to stare at a row of wealthy men's houses through barred gates. At least I take satisfaction in knowing it was you who hired this scam of a taxi. Marcus chuckled softly in the dark. You can thank me for the ride, Ty. Then his tone became serious. "I've been thinking, and I must have been mistaken about that blackmail idea. If the guy had only $70 on him, he wouldn't be on his way to pay anything. I'm surprised you, and even Jordan and Mike Taggart, didn't think to go back for the hat. It couldn't have gone far, despite that hill and the flooded gutters. This isn't like you." "Forget the hat," McCarty cut in, irritation creeping into his voice. "I'm more concerned about the man, if that cold, muddy rainwater in the gutter had something to do with it." He trailed off, lost in thought, and after a moment, Marcus remarked in a frustrated tone, "I've followed you through more than just muddy rainwater on countless cases you've pulled me into. But if this grand education you've been getting from all those books has turned you into some sort of riddle maker, you can keep the answers to yourself as far as I'm concerned." In the same way, if that guy wasn't running from someone or rushing to meet them, but was just dashing through the storm, stumbling and stopping, and then taking off again, he must have completely lost his mind. The asylum would have caught him if the morgue hadn't. "You've got a point, Max. That's exactly what I was thinking just now," McCarty replied, returning to his usual friendly demeanor. "Not about him being insane, perhaps, but delirious from illness or pain. When he fell, with his head hanging over the gutter and the cold water rushing over his face, it seemed like that jolt brought him back to his senses for just a moment. You could see in his eyes, and the way he struggled for breath, that he was trying to communicate something, a horror greater than the fear of dying." "That's quite a lot to read in a man's eyes," Marcus observed with unusual skepticism. "Maybe he wasn't thinking about dying. From what you say, he looked like a pretty healthy fellow. If those books are leading you to see meanings in people's faces that aren't really there, you might want to stick to the newspapers." "There's not much meaning anyone could glean from your face, my friend," the offended student shot back. "Here we are and the gates are locked, just like I warned. What's our next move? You started this, Max, so it's on you." But it turned out to be up to neither of them. Just as McCarty stepped out of the taxi in front of the grand wrought-iron gates that lined the side street, a tall figure emerged from the shadows, and a familiar voice called out with a tone of satisfaction tinged with amusement. "There you are, Ty. I've been waiting for you." "Inspector," McCarty exclaimed, staring in surprise at his former boss. "How on earth did you know?" Inspector Lucien laughed. "How did I know you'd be hot on the trail, with the scent fresh and the wind at your back? Good evening, Riordan. It feels like old times to see you trailing after Ty once more." "It's Max who's leading tonight," McCarty said with a chuckle as Marcus stepped forward to pay the taxi driver. Despite the rain, he was eager to come take a look here after I told him about the drunk who dropped dead right across the street from the station house by the waterfront. "The drunk, is it?" Inspector Lucien tapped the leather case he was carrying. "I have the man's hat here, which you found in the gutter. I can guess you saw the initials inside, even though you didn't mention it to the boys at the house. When I learned you were on the scene and heard how you quietly gathered all the details on the case before making an exit with an excuse about rheumatism, I knew you'd be on top of things. Then, when your phone didn't answer a little while ago, I was fairly certain you had read that identification tag correctly and were on your way here, so I waited. It seems this is going to turn out to be bigger than we first thought." They had retreated under the relative safety of an overhanging cornice, and Marcus, who had shot a reproachful glance at McCarty when the hat was mentioned, asked with keen interest, "Are you saying, Inspector, that the guy didn't just drop dead by chance? What were the initials? Who was he?" "The initials are BP," the inspector spoke with added gravity. "I have a list of all the homeowners on this block. There are only a few. You can see from the street lamps that each place is much larger than a standard city lot. The owner of number 7 is Benjamin Webster, and if this is his hat—" "But the tag on the key ring said number 4, Marcus interjected doubtfully as the inspector paused. "Someone named BP could live there too, sir. Number 4 is occupied by a single bachelor, a Mr. Henry Orbit," the inspector said, shaking his head. "I can't explain how the keys to his house ended up in Webster's pocket, but that's a minor detail. Here comes the private watchman now. Let's go. He stepped toward the gateway in the center of the street, but McCarty placed a hand on his arm to stop him. Just a moment, Inspector. I know I have no involvement in this case, if there even is one, but it's easier to change hats than houses. If you could stop by number 4 first, and let me handle the conversation with whoever answers the door. He hesitated, and Inspector Lucien shot him a sharp glance. What's going on, Ty? He asked, his tone urgent. Have you seen something I haven't? I've seen the body, sir, McCarty replied cautiously. The solitary figure of the private watchman was making his way down the enclosed street, moving with purpose. When he reached the gate, the inspector spoke to him in a low but authoritative voice. The watchman responded with a startled exclamation, and a brief exchange followed while McCarty and Marcus looked down the long stretch of the street beyond the tall iron bars. In the glow of the lanterns lighting the mall, the smooth pavement shimmered like glass under the falling raindrops. The houses lining the street, built of shining marble or older, darker brownstone, resembled miniature palaces with their vaguely defined turrets and balconies. Ahead loomed another gate, beyond which lay the dark mass of trees in the great park across the avenue, untouched by the first frost of the season. It's like a scene from a picture book, even at night, Marcus commented, then shook his head. But it feels so limited entirely. Despite its grandeur, the residents within have no better chance of keeping their private matters to themselves than if they lived in a row of factory workers' homes. It's no wonder that secrets can't last long behind these gates. I'd prefer to be free outside than confined in there, no matter how wealthy those families are, McCarty agreed. But now the watchman is opening up, and the inspector is signaling. I wonder if he'll let me do as I please. The large gates swung open, and the three of them entered, with the inspector leading them toward the south sidewalk, lined with houses numbered on even sides. Of course I know the servants for every home in this block, the grey-haired watchman said in a somewhat haughty tone. Mr. Orbit has no one with the initials you've mentioned, Inspector, and no guests at the moment, or I would have been informed. It's my job, as well as the day man, to know everyone who comes and goes through these gates. See that tie? Marcus nudged his friend. It's worse than a jail. But McCarty didn't pay attention. He scrutinized the house fronts as they walked by, stealing quick glances at the few lit windows across the way, all of which had been discreetly curtained. The first two houses on the south side were completely dark. The third, number 6, was an ornate structure made of a pinkish stone, adorned with tiny, pointed turrets and unexpected balconies. A bright light glowed from the upper floors, but the next house, number 4, despite being smaller than the mansions across the street, gave off an impression of grandeur with its stately lines of white marble, interrupted only by elegantly dark vines spilling from the window boxes. It appeared to be connected to the house next door by some sort of conservatory, but there was no time to explore further, as the watchman stopped, and Inspector Lucien stepped onto the porch and rang the bell. McCarty followed close behind, with Marcus right at his heels. As they paused, waiting, the soft yet resonant tones of an organ drifted to them through the windows on their right, casting a gentle glow. From down the street behind them, a faint gong chimed, and with a frustrated exclamation, the watchman hurried off to open the gate on the park side for an approaching motor car. He had barely moved out of earshot when the inspector leaned closer to McCarty and whispered, "What's going on, Ty? Did you catch what the watchman said? BP doesn't belong here, despite the tag on the keyring." "You're right, sir," McCarty replied, though his tone didn't carry any disappointment. "I just need to speak with whoever opens the door." There was no sound from within, but as McCarty finished speaking, the door swung open. Illuminated by the soft light stood a man whose presence momentarily left even McCarty speechless. Marcus gulped. They were met by a man who, though taller than most, was unmistakably of Mongolian descent, dressed in the flowing robes typical of his homeland. He bowed slightly, with dignity, and upon seeing that the visitors remained silent, he inquired, "What can I assist you with, please?" His voice was high and melodic, devoid of any discernible accent. "We don't wish to disturb Mr. Orbit, in case there's been a misunderstanding, but a man claiming to be a servant here has had a bit of an accident," McCarty explained. "He's somewhat stout, has a round, red face, and a little bald spot on his head. He's around 45, maybe nearing 50. Do you know his name?" McCarty edged closer to the wide entrance door, prompting the Chinaman to turn slightly as the low light illuminated his face, yet it remained inscrutable as he listened attentively. After a brief pause, when he finally spoke, his words flowed smoothly. "It's Griffith, the valet. You wish to see Mr. Orbit. He's currently occupied, but I'll check to see if he can meet with you. This way, gentlemen." He shut the door behind them and led them into the house. As he moved, the long queue of hair that hung from his head swayed with each step. "Eh, Chink," Marcus muttered quietly. "What is he, the laundress here?" Yet again his comment went unnoticed as McCarty gazed around. He had been in many wealthy homes before, but he had never entered a space of such understated grandeur as Mr. Henry Orbit's hall. Little did he know he was surrounded by nearly priceless artifacts. The dimly lit panels on the walls were Catalan tapestries from the 15th century. The frescoed ceiling had been touched by Raphael himself, and the great carved chair had once belonged to the Duomo, where Savonarola himself had rested. The former roundsman could only sense a profound beauty, and he walked as softly as his heavy boots would allow on the ancient, thick rug beneath him. The Chinese butler escorted them to a spacious room on the left side of the hall, gestured for them to take seats, and then exited, closing the door behind him. From the room across the hall, the booming notes of the organ filled the air with a wave of harmony that made the impressionable Marcus catch his breath and instinctively lower his head. "Snap out of it, Max. We're not in church," McCarty scolded, then turned to the inspector. "You see, sir, that fellow who died down there by the wharves had on his own cheap shoes, but wore the costly cast-off clothing of another man, one who clearly wasn't built like him, none other than his employer. He had shaved too frequently and very closely, like a man in constant service, perhaps a butler or a valet. If he borrowed cigars that were a notch above what his own taste would suggest, it was likely he had borrowed a hat, too, without permission. It struck me that the keys were his own, along with the little metal tag, which is why I thought it might be wiser to stop here first." "You were absolutely right," Inspector Lucien replied with gusto. "In my haste, I overlooked too many details. Let's find out what Mr. Orbit can tell us about his man." However, Mr. Orbit didn't appear right away, and as the last echoes of the organ faded into silence, Marcus finally spoke up. "Valet or not, what was someone from a respectable house like this doing down in that rough part of town by the waterfront, especially during a storm? Can you explain that? What did the ambulance doctor say he died from?" The inspector shook his head. "He couldn't determine that. He just confirmed the man was dead. Now, it's up to the medical examiner, and we'll have more information in the morning after the autopsy. What about you, Tai? Have you found anything interesting over there?" The room the Chinese attendant had taken them to was a library, modern yet luxurious, and with a monastic vibe, featuring tall-backed, cathedral-style chairs, refectory tables, and benches, all set over a floor covered with dried rushes atop inlaid marble. A massive log smouldered in the fireplace, and books filled the walls from floor to ceiling, nestled between narrow stained-glass windows. The light was provided by torches mounted in sconces and braziers hanging from heavy chains. McCarty had moved over to a low row of open shelves, turning his back to his two companions. He seemed not to have heard the inspector's question. "It's literature he's taken to now," Marcus said with a frown. "All because of that new school the commissioner's starting at headquarters. This psycho, whatever has really gotten to his head, and I doubt Tai will ever be the same man again." McCarty's expression showed signs of outrage at this ungrateful accusation, but before he turned away, he discreetly slipped a pale blue pamphlet into his inner breast pocket. It had nearly fallen into his hands when he took out a larger leather-bound book. He set the book back down, and turned with composure to approach the hearth once more. "You needn't worry about me, Max. There are plenty of others who could benefit from broadening their minds," he said sharply. "The inspector is here for a case of sudden death, not to hear your views about my personal matters." An amused yet affectionate glint appeared in the inspector's sharp eyes as he glanced at his former colleague. He was about to speak when a smooth voice from the doorway interrupted them. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" it said. "I am Mr. Orbit." The three men turned to see a tall, elegantly poised man in evening attire observing them with a serious gaze. Although he was well over 50, the lines in his remarkably distinguished face spoke of strength rather than age. His dark hair was only lightly dusted with grey at the temples, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man at the peak of his maturity. As he stepped further into the room, the inspector moved forward to greet him. "My apologies for disturbing you, Mr. Orbit, but we'll only need a few minutes of your time. I'm Inspector Lucien from Police Headquarters, and these are two of my assistants. We're looking for some information about a man who has a tag with this address on his keyring." Henry Orbit nodded slowly, concern settling deeper on his face, as he gestured for them to return to their seats before he settled himself into a high-backed chair facing them. "I'm only aware of one person who carries such a tag, and that's my valet, Griffith. Is he in some kind of trouble?" "Way Anya tells me that, based on your description, the man you're asking about is definitely Griffith." "You don't look surprised," the inspector remarked bluntly. "Has your valet been in trouble before?" A flicker of regret, more than annoyance, passed over their host's face as he shook his head. "He has found himself in a few predicaments, though nothing, to my knowledge, that would warrant police involvement. I'm afraid he's a bit of a rogue, but he has been with me for 22 years, and I can't bring myself to think of him as entirely untrustworthy. Has he suggested that I would help him now?" "The man I'm inquiring about is beyond anyone's help," the official replied. "He is dead." "Dead," the other echoed in a low, stunned voice after a brief pause. "That seems unbelievable. Just a few hours ago I gave him permission to go out. What happened? Was it an accident?" "That's what we need to determine," Inspector Lucien said grimly. "There are several suspicious circumstances surrounding his death. Do you know if he had any enemies?" Orbit frowned slightly, and his gaze flickered in astonishment between McCarty and Marcus before returning to the inspector. "Enemies," he repeated. "Surely there wasn't any violence. I know nothing of Griffith's personal life, but I wouldn't have thought he had any active enemies." Chapter 3. There was a brief pause before the inspector asked, "Did he give you any reason for wanting to head out this evening?" "No, nothing at all. It wasn't unusual, so I didn't think much of it." Orbit's hands tightened slightly. "I can't believe that poor Griffith is truly gone. Maybe Way Anya made a mistake. Perhaps someone else had gotten hold of Griffith's keyring. Can you describe him to me and tell me about the suspicious circumstances you mentioned?" "You can describe him, Ty. You studied him and his clothing more closely than I did." The inspector's tone carried an added weight, and he added, "Special Deputy McCarty was there when this man passed away." Orbit nodded, fixing his gaze expectantly on McCarty as he provided a brief description, leaving out the letters he had seen in the hat. When he finished, Orbit exclaimed, "It's definitely him. That raincoat and brown sack suit were mine, given to him when I no longer wanted them, and he must have replicated my cat's eye pin and cufflinks, though I never saw them on him. How did he die?" "Well, he was rushing along in the rain and suddenly collapsed." McCarty chose his words with care. "When a friend and I reached him, he was taking his last breaths, and the end came as I supported his head on my knee." "How did he come to be wearing a hat with the initials BP, Mr. Orbit? Who is BP?" Orbit frowned in thought. "I can't think of anyone with those initials right now, but of course I'm not familiar with his friends or acquaintances," he finally replied. "That aside, what was so suspicious about the poor fellow's death?" "He was an exemplary servant, but when he had his own time, his habits were quite erratic, and I wouldn't have been surprised to hear that his heart had given out or that he had suffered a stroke. Had he been drinking the last time you saw him? This evening, if I recall correctly, McCarty inquired. Absolutely not. I have never seen him drunk, or he wouldn't have lasted even an hour in my service. He knew this well, and even though I suspect he occasionally drank too much, he was always careful to conceal it from me. Was he drinking when you went to help him? McCarty chose not to answer. I notice you don't ask where that was. Do you have any idea where he might have been going tonight? Not in the slightest, Orbit replied with a shrug. I've told you I know nothing of his private affairs and have no interest in them. Still, he'd been your personal servant for over 20 years, McCarty pressed. Wouldn't you want to know what he was doing if you found out he left your house to head to the waterfront in one of the roughest areas of the city? Orbit looked genuinely stunned. The waterfront, he echoed. I can't imagine what he could have been doing in a place like that. Even in his indulgences, Griffith was never drawn to anything sordid, to my knowledge. He merely mimicked the vices of those above his station. I was getting to that, McCarty noted. You mentioned earlier that he had gotten into trouble more than once. What kind of trouble are we talking about? Gambling debts and indiscreet liaisons with women, fellow servants of higher rank, or the wives of upper servants. When it came time to settle financial matters, he approached me for an advance on his salary, and that was how I discovered his troubles. Orbit paused, and then added thoughtfully, He hasn't been in any trouble lately, at least none that required my help. What time was the last you saw him alive tonight? A little before 7, when he laid out these clothes for me. Orbit gestured to what he was wearing. I had some guests, 3 gentlemen, all from nearby, and I was preoccupied, but Griffith's behavior and appearance were probably just as they always were, or I would have noticed a difference. My guests are still here with me. He paused, and McCarty picked up on the implication. We're sorry to interrupt your evening, but we need to know what your man was doing in that area. You may not know his friends, but perhaps you have an idea of which servants from your neighbors he was closest with. If you're unsure, maybe your neighbors can help. Is it truly that important? There was no hint of irritation in Orbit's voice, only a dignified refusal. You can understand that any unwanted attention regarding my unfortunate valet's death would be incredibly unappealing to me, and having my friends involved would be even worse. This evening, I'm hosting Mr. Gardner Rene and his son, Mr. Brinsley Rene II, who live right across the street at number 5, along with Mr. Eustace Ellison from number 2, the house next door. I have no idea if Griffith knew any of the servants from the Rene or Ellison households, but I will ask around. He stood and left the room, and the inspector turned to McCarty. Is all this really necessary, Ty? I know I mentioned it seemed serious, but that was when I thought the man found down by the river was the millionaire Webster. If it's just a wayward valet, we can let it go, at least until the autopsy shows any signs of foul play, the inspector replied. When you asked me if I had seen more in this than you, Inspector, I reminded you I had seen the body, McCarty said quietly. Now you're questioning whether it's necessary to figure out who this Griffith fellow was close with before the autopsy, and I'll say it wouldn't hurt. After all, I saw him before he became a corpse. Heart disease might have taken him, or maybe a stroke, but it's worth knowing what caused his sudden demise tonight, even if he was just a valet. His earnestness was evident, and the inspector opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted as the door swung open, and Orbit brought in 3 men. The first was a bit younger than his host, stout and bald, except for a ring of sandy hair. His mouth, tucked beneath a small reddish mustache, had a habitual quirk at the corners, and his blue eyes sparkled with an interested, friendly curiosity as he regarded the police official and his 2 deputies. The second man was about the same age, with a smooth-shaven face that was strikingly handsome. He wore a youthfully tailored dinner coat with a casual air that suggested a middle-aged charmer. The last of Orbit's guests to enter was a tall, thin man around 30, his overly serious expression accentuated by shell-rimmed glasses balanced on the bridge of his nose. His chin was cleft like that of the man who had entered just before him, revealing a clear family resemblance. Before any introductions were made, McCarty identified him as Brinsley René, the older man as his father, Gardner René, and the first to arrive as their neighbour, Eustace Ellison. It was Ellison who broke the silence first. "Terrible news about poor Griffith, Inspector. This is a terrible strain on Mr. Orbit, I must say. I've seen Griffith around the house for years, of course, but I can't say I've had more than a handful of conversations with him in my life. I'm quite certain that none of the servants in my household know any more about him than I do." "Why is that, Mr. Ellison?" the inspector inquired. "Well, for one, they're all elderly and quite set in their ways. They've been with my family for many years. Mr. Orbit just mentioned a moment ago that Griffith occasionally indulges in certain vices. He wouldn't find much in common with our staff, but you're welcome to question them tomorrow as much as you like." "Thank you." The inspector turned to the elder of the two remaining guests. "Mr. René, have you noticed any interactions between Mr. Orbit's valet and your servants?" A hint of sarcasm crept into his voice, and the flush that rose to Ellison's thinning hair showed that the remark had hit a nerve. Gardner René responded cheerfully. "I can't say I have, Inspector. Our household consists solely of men, as my son and I live with my father, who is quite elderly and an invalid. His male nurse, a Swede who speaks very little English, and John Platt, the butler who's nearly 70, are the only servants here who might have crossed paths with Griffith. However, I have seen him a few times with a butler working at another house on this block, and while I find it quite uncomfortable to direct even the most casual official inquiries at an establishment run by a vulnerable lady—" "Father," the young man interrupted, his voice filled with shock, "I'm astonished." "You often are, Bryn," his father replied smoothly. "It's my responsibility to inform these officers about what I've observed. The only servant in Mall I've ever noticed with Griffith is Riddle, Mrs. Thorne's butler. If anyone knows anything about the fellow's private affairs, it would be him." "Which is Mrs. Thorne's house?" the inspector asked. "Number 6, right next door on the east," the younger René answered quickly. "But I'm sure my father must be mistaken. If you disturb Mrs. Thorne at this hour over mere gossip, you're only going to upset her. Really, why should any of us be questioned? I heard that Mr. Griffith dropped dead in the street, and it only matters to Mr. Orbit, who's lost a competent servant." The inspector quickly glanced at McCarty, who paid no attention to the irritated young man and turned his focus to the master of the house. "Mr. Orbit, do you know anything about Griffith's family?" "Not in this country. He was the son of a blacksmith from Cornwall who moved to London as a boy and began working as a bootboy. He worked his way up to valet, and as Mr. René noted, he was quite efficient when he came to me." "Then," McCarty said thoughtfully, almost to himself, "there's no one to notify about the funeral arrangements." "I'll take care of everything," Orbit said firmly. "I'll arrange for a funeral home to collect the body right away. It's been taken to the morgue, hasn't it?" McCarty nodded. "Tomorrow will be fine, sir. There'll be some paperwork and permits to arrange. The inspector will keep you informed." McCarty and his team had been standing since Orbit returned with his guests, and now he raised his eyebrows to his former superior and subtly gestured toward the door. Inspector Lucien acknowledged him with a nod and addressed the 4 men together. "We won't trouble you any further, and if we can gather the information we need from elsewhere, we won't have to bother the staff of anyone living here in the mall. Good night." The Chinese butler stood ready to escort them out, but McCarty paused for a moment after the others left. "Are you the butler here?" The man bowed slightly in acknowledgement, and McCarty continued, "How many other servants work here, and what are their names?" "We have Andre the chef, Clara the houseman, and little Ling Sunny, the coffee boy. That's all except for Griffith." The butler's voice remained steady, a melodic monotone that added an air of calm. "Griffith is dead," McCarty said flatly. The butler bowed again, and when he raised his head, his expression was unchanged. After waiting in vain for a response, McCarty pressed on. "Were you all here tonight? Did anyone leave the house since the afternoon besides Griffith?" "No one." There was a finality in the butler's rhythmic tones now, and feeling frustrated, McCarty turned to rejoin Inspector Marcus, who was waiting on the sidewalk in front of the large, turreted house next door. All the lights had been extinguished, except for one on the top floor, glimmering down at them like a solitary, watchful eye. "What were you discussing with that butler?" Marcus asked, as they walked toward the eastern gate where the watchman stood. "I didn't get anything I wanted, except a list of the other household staff and confirmation that no one but Griffith left the house tonight," McCarty replied, annoyed. "What he took from me was my temper. I sprung the news on him that Griffith was dead, and he didn't even blink or say a word, just waited politely for me to finish my business." "It's possible Orbit told him when he went to gather his guests," the inspector observed dryly. "Does he seem like the type who would stop to chat with a servant?" McCarty retorted. "Not to me. He might tell this way Anya, as he called him, after his 3 neighbors leave, but that will just be so he can break the news to the others before the morning papers hit. For 22 years, Griffith has been with him, and Orbit has never learned more about his affairs than the day he first hired him. It seems odd that in all that time they never once spoke to each other as equals, and yet I don't believe Orbit was being dishonest. Just look at how he treated us. He was always polite and friendly, and you could never pin down a single word or glance from him that was haughty or arrogant, unlike most people here who get uppity whenever the police start asking questions. Still, there was something about him that made you feel as if you were in the presence of a royal duke, at the very least. It's that air of grandeur he has, without even realizing it." "A true gentleman, Mr. Orbit," Marcus agreed. "But we still haven't uncovered anything about what Griffith was doing in Mike Taggart's precinct, or why he ran until he collapsed. We're likely not going to find those answers here between these 2 gates." "You've got something else on your mind, Ty," the inspector observed keenly. "You wouldn't be so insistent on questioning Orbit's acquaintances if you didn't have an inkling of what triggered Griffith's collapse, and that it somehow ties back here. What did you witness before he died that you're keeping to yourself?" "I'll tell you tomorrow, Inspector, if you drop by when you've got a moment, or call Max and me to come downtown to you," McCarty replied quickly, lowering his voice as they neared the gate and saw the watchman approaching. "Max is off duty, and I'm bringing him home with me tonight, although I fear he'll keep me up until dawn with his wild theories about what kind of desperate crime brought Griffith to the waterfront. Thank goodness the rain has stopped, and he won't have to ride home in damp clothes." But it was McCarty himself who signaled a passing taxi after they had parted ways with the inspector and discreetly turned a corner. He had no time to check the fare on the way home, as he was focused on calming his upset companion. "Will you ever learn, you fool, that when I'm talking about you to benefit someone else, it's for a reason?" he said, frustration evident in his voice, as Marcus bitterly rejected his hospitality. "I only mentioned my desire for rest to distract the inspector. Otherwise, he would have followed us to uncover what I was up to. And we both know it's nothing more than the look on a dying man's face, and how he struggled to speak, but couldn't. If the medical examiner says it was natural causes tomorrow, the inspector will have the last laugh at our expense, and he'll forget about tonight, but I won't forget. I need to find out why Griffith died, and what he was so desperate to communicate." "Someday," Marcus started ominously, but his tone softened slightly. "Someday you'll overdo it when using me to communicate, and this radio station of ours will go silent. The inspector was right, though. I can see that clearly now. Whatever caused Griffith to have that episode, you think it happened during that fire at the society, or else you wouldn't have listened to that fat, bald little man, nor the old gossip and his son. I have a feeling that one of these nights will be propping a scaling ladder against that iron fence and chloroforming the guard, just so you can interrogate that butler next door." Back in McCarty's rooms once again, Marcus dried his rain-soaked boots comfortably before the small coal fire in the grate. He watched with a curious glint in his eyes as his host neatly put away the books he had just acquired into a closet, then set about clearing away the mess left from several days of bachelor living. He remained silent until McCarty finished the task. Then he remarked, "When you're investigating a case, Ty, you need to use your head along with your eyes and ears. But tonight, one of your senses wasn't quite alert. Not that it had anything to do with Griffith, of course, but neither did anything else we found out except for his name. You missed a small but significant detail." "Oh, did I?" McCarty shot back, feeling both stung and cautious. "And which one of my senses was not working?" "Your sense of smell." The response was straightforward. "Unless you're holding back on me, your nose was not doing its job." McCarty stared in surprise. "What was there to smell?" he challenged. "Since when is your nose sharper than mine?" "It's keen for one thing it's been trained to detect for many years, and that's fire. Ty, there's been a fire at Orbit's house, just a few hours before we arrived." "A fire, huh?" McCarty snorted. "There may have been one in the kitchen, given that dinner was cooked there, and you saw the log burning in the library fire." "Stoves and hearths don't burn wool, silk, carpets, and varnished wood, my friend." Marcus set his pipe down on the mantel and stood up. "It must have been a small fire, as the smoke had cleared completely, but the smell lingered. There was just enough in the air for me to catch a whiff, even if no one else could. I can't quite put it into words, but if you have a keen sense of smell, you'll notice that everything flammable has a distinct scent, and what I smelled tonight was definitely the burning of household furnishings." Chapter 4. The two of them slept in late the next morning, and they had just come back from the little restaurant around the corner, where McCarty often ate, when the bell jingled from downstairs. "Don't worry about it, Ty," Marcus said with a smile, as his host tossed aside his newspaper. "I'll let the inspector in." "And how do you know?" "It wasn't for my sake that you cleaned up last night. You did it because you expected the inspector would come early, and you wanted to be prepared." Marcus chuckled, a rare sound for him, as he pressed the button to unlock the entrance door. "I've been spending so much time with detectives, both active and retired, that I'm picking up their habits." "You're getting too clever for your own good," McCarty grumbled, though a glint of amusement sparkled in his eyes as he walked past Marcus, opened the door, and leaned over the banister. Imitating the inspector's satisfied tone from the night before, he called down, "There you are, sir. We've been waiting for you." "Imagine that," Inspector Lucien laughed, as he bounded up the stairs with surprising agility for a man with grey hair. "Trying to get back at me for last night, are you? If you hadn't held back on me, we'd still be on the job in the new Queen's Mall. Good morning, Riordan. I suppose you're reveling in my oversight too." "Not a sound from me, let alone any revelry, until I know what's happening, Inspector." "Ty hasn't told me anything except the look he saw on Griffith's face," Marcus replied, moving a shabby easy-chair closer and placing an ashtray within reach. His usually warm, expressive face was now set in a serious expression, and the inspector's demeanor had also turned somber. McCarty shut the door, and reaching for a box of cigars on the mantel, offered it to his visitor. "The autopsy should be done by now, I think." He spoke with a casualness that belied the excitement in his breath. "What kind of poison was it, Inspector?" The inspector nodded slowly. "I thought you might have figured it out. It was physostigmine, the medical examiner said. Powdered Tunis bean. It's colorless, tasteless, and just a grain would be lethal in about 3 hours or so, but Griffith had taken a bit more than that." "Good heavens," Marcus gasped. "So it really was murder." A genuine look of satisfaction crossed McCarty's face, but he shook his head. "I've heard of many kinds of beans, including those Mexican ones that leap like a frog, but never one that brings death," he said. "If one grain could kill in 3 or 4 hours, then a little more would likely do the job in 2 or 3, I suppose. Griffith collapsed at around 9 o'clock over by the station house, so he must have taken that powdered bean before leaving the Orbit house, or just after, though we still haven't determined exactly when he left. I wonder what the symptoms of that poison would be." "I asked the medical examiner," the inspector replied. "He said it would start with abdominal pain and nausea, followed by spasmodic breathing, numbness, and eventually complete paralysis of respiration, leading to death. However, that doesn't explain why he was staggering around, making Jordan think he was drunk. He paused, and McCarty lit his cigar, taking a contemplative drag before responding. Maybe it does. The pain and nausea would have subsided, but they would have left him weak, and the paralysis would have been creeping over his lungs, making it hard for him to breathe. He was fighting for breath, stumbling, stopping, and then lurching forward again. He was choking and gasping when Jordan and I first flipped him over, and he died with a heave and a snort, as if a heavy weight had landed on his chest. I could see the agony in his face, the fear of knowing he'd been poisoned. He seemed to know who did it too, or I'd be mistaken, for he was trying to say something as the end came. "What else did you notice?" The inspector's voice carried an unusual sharpness. "I need to know everything that happened, Ty, from the moment you first saw him. If you had told me last night before the watchman opened the gates, we might have saved valuable time." All I had to share was the look on Griffith's face and how hard he tried to speak, and I thought maybe he was running like that because he was delirious from pain, not from drink. There weren't any visible marks on him when we brought him into the station house, at least none that I could see, and it struck me that it must be poison. But since I only had my own suspicions, I didn't want to voice them until the autopsy confirmed them. I should remind you, Inspector, that I resigned from the force a long time ago, and with these new methods. "Damn the new methods," the inspector shouted. "You've said that about every case we've tackled together since you resigned, yet each time you come back long enough to uncover the truth when no one else has been able to. I told Orbit last night that you were now my special deputy, and by God you are, until we discover who killed Griffith." "Yes, sir," McCarty replied quietly, avoiding Marcus's gaze, but Marcus had his own pressing concern to deal with. If Griffith ingested that poison, or if it was administered to him, either before or right after he left the house, then Ty will start looking for evidence down there between those two locked gates. They're watched constantly. You heard what that watchman said, he added, somewhat wistfully. You'll probably be able to get a pass for Ty, but unless there's a fire big enough to raise a general alarm, I won't be able to follow him, Inspector, and this will be the first case he's handled since leaving the force that I won't be involved in from beginning to end, every moment I was off duty. "Don't worry, Riordan," Inspector Lucien said, with a reassuring smile. "I've never been able to figure out which one of you has the better luck, but your partnership is unmatched, and I'll make sure you both get a pass. I brought along a map of New Queen's Mall so you can quickly see who owns each house and which ones are occupied." He pulled out a folded piece of paper that roughly mapped out the street, with names and numbers indicated in blocks on either side. The two of them leaned in, eager to study it. "Look here, Max," McCarty pointed with his finger. "From the avenue, the opposite gate to the one we went through last night, the corner house, number 2 on the south side, belongs to the Goddards. That's the stout, bald man with the little red mustache and a twinkle in his eye. Do you remember him? Right next to it, but separated by that bulge that looks like a conservatory, is number 4, Orbit's house. Then comes Mrs. Thorne, number 6, where that butler Riddle works, and then there's 8 and 10, but those are marked closed. The Falkinghams at number 8 have lived overseas for over 20 years, and the only heir to number 10 is Georgiana Davenant, a 12-year-old girl away at school," the inspector interjected. "That wraps up the south side of the mall, but starting again at the western end, there's a grand house that takes up the entire space across from both Ellison's and Orbit's, marked with the numbers 1 and 3. The Burminster family occupies it. They were the original owners of most of the block, and played a key role in having it enclosed with gates. Number 5 belongs to the Sloanes. You met 2 of their 3 generations last night." "Ah, that would be the charming middle-aged man, and the son who won the lady's attention away from Mrs. Thorne," McCarty remarked. "How on earth?" Marcus's jaw dropped in surprise, and the inspector glanced at him sharply. "It was as obvious as the nose on your face," McCarty said impatiently. "Now, moving on. Number 7, next to the Sloanes, is the Websters. That's where Benjamin Webster lives, the man you thought owned the hat Griffith was wearing, right? Correct. That hat remains an important detail in the case, so keep that in mind. The inspector leaned back over his notes and pointed to the final property. This house, at the end of the mall on the north side, belongs to the Quentin family. 2 branches are battling over it, and it's been empty and mired in litigation for several years. I'm heading over to Mrs. Thorne's now to speak with her butler. Would you like to join me? Marcus jumped up hastily and reached for his hat on the mantel, but McCarty quickly decided, "We'll accompany you through the gates to smooth things over with the day watchman, but I think it's better if we hang back for a bit and not interrupt you. We might stop by the Orbit house later to see if any of the other servants can share more than way Anya does. If you do, be careful not to mention the autopsy or even hint that Griffith's death might not have been natural," the inspector cautioned them as they headed for the stairs. "I'll probably see you there later." This time, they entered the mall through the western gate, where the private watchman on duty appeared younger and less intimidated by his position than the one they'd met the night before. Clearly, he had been informed of their possible arrival and readily agreed to the inspector's request that his 2 deputies be allowed entry without any questions. As the inspector made his way to the Thorne house, McCarty turned to the watchman with a friendly smile and offered him a cigar. "Care for a smoke?" "Thanks, but I'll have to save it for later." The young man was tall and strong, with a good-natured, if somewhat vacant, expression. He grinned sheepishly at the gesture, but then the grin faded, and he leaned in slightly, speaking in a low voice. "They haven't brought Alfred Griffith's body back yet. I've been keeping an eye out for it all morning." "It's not coming here. Didn't you know that?" McCarty's tone was conspiratorial. "Mr. Orbit told Max and me last night that he's arranging to take it to a funeral home and have it buried from there." "Right, Max." Still unsure of himself, Marcus simply nodded in agreement. After giving him a look of exasperation, McCarty asked, "What's your name?" William Jennings," the watchman quickly responded. "Well, James, you've got a pretty cushy job here, don't you? If you're heading over to the other gate, Max and I can walk along with you. That's all you have to do, right? Just catch the eye of the pretty nursemaids taking care of all the kids around here." James Jennings blushed slightly. "Have you ever noticed that the better the neighborhood, the fewer kids there are?" he shot back. "On this block, with its 6 families, there are only 3 children. Nathan Goddard, who's 14. Daphne Burminster, 2 years younger. She's from that big corner house over there, but her family hasn't returned from the country yet. And little Maudie Thorne. Nathan is somewhat delicate and has a private tutor, and Miss Daphne has both a maid and a governess, although they're both old and rather grumpy. Little Maudie is the only one with a nurse, and she's foreign, French, I think. Some of those French girls are real stunners." McCarty spoke like someone who knew what he was talking about, and Marcus cleared his throat. McCarty quickly added, "Is she a looker?" "Pretty as a postcard, and as lovely in personality as she is in looks." James's tone was filled with admiration. "I suspect she's new here, as she's so young and shy, but she knows how to handle herself, as Alfred Griffith learned the hard way." He suddenly stopped, but McCarty chuckled with easy amusement. "I hear he was quite the charmer with the ladies," he remarked. "Not her type. Isolde, even her name is lovely. Isolde is courteous to everyone, but Alfred Griffith didn't seem to get that and thought he had her smitten, I guess. One late night about a month ago, Dave Hollies, the night watchman, told me. Isolde dashed out to the drugstore to get some medicine for little Maudie, who had fallen ill quite suddenly, and when she returned, Alfred Griffith met her right in front of her house. He must have tried to put his arm around her or something because she let out a little cry, and Dave, who was just getting ready to close the gate after letting her in, rushed over as Alfred Griffith murmured something quietly to her, and then she slapped his face. After that, she dashed into the house, sobbing. Dave said he gave Alfred Griffith a piece of his mind, the big stiff. James caught himself and added, feeling embarrassed again, "I didn't mean any disrespect to the deceased. but I suppose nobody on the block had much use for him, except for Mrs. Thorne's butler, Riddle. The two of them have been inseparable for years. Is that right? McCarty turned pointedly to his modest colleague. Didn't someone mention that to you, Max? That Griffith and this Riddle were close. Absolutely. With newfound confidence, Marcus chimed in. It was that butler at Orbit's who told me, I think. He's a nice enough guy, even with that pigtail. Didn't you find him agreeable, Ty? I found he had more sense than most of the fools who come over here and end up in the fire department. McCarty shot back emphatically, then turned back to the watchman. What kind of guy is this Riddle? Similar to Griffith? Maybe on the inside, but you'd never guess it just by looking at him. He's at least 10 years younger than Griffith, slim and dark, and keeps to himself. If it weren't for the gates, you wouldn't even notice when he came or went. McCarty threw a quick, sidelong look at his source of information. He keeps odd hours, does he? Late ones. James flashed a grin. I suspect Mrs. Thorne doesn't realize it, but being the only man in a house certainly gives him an advantage. He's not too keen on his activities getting out, though. Dave says he's tried more than once to sneak in with the milk. I've hardly spoken more than a handful of words to him, and I've been on this job for over a year. Here comes Nathan Ellison now. The three of them walked past the shuttered homes that surrounded Mrs. Thorne, and drew closer to the eastern gate. As James picked up his pace, McCarty peered through the tall iron bars of the fence and spotted a small, slight boy with bright red hair and a pale, delicate face. The boy approached with his narrow shoulders slumped and a dragging gait. But upon seeing James Jennings open the gate, he quickened his steps, a smile lifting the corners of his sensitive mouth. "Hello, James." His voice was still a clear, almost childlike treble. "Hey there, buddy. What's the word?" the watchman replied cheerfully. "It's not very good for me." The boy's expression darkened again. "Mr. Blaisdell is going away on a sketching trip in October. I wish I could go with him. He'd take me, but Dad won't allow it." The two who had lingered a bit off to the side now noticed that he carried a small leather portfolio and a sketchbook. "An artist, that boy," Marcus muttered under his breath. "He should be out playing baseball and getting into some good, healthy scrapes. Look at that hollow chest and those spindly legs." "Poor little guy," McCarty said softly as Nathan Ellison passed them, throwing a cursory glance of polite curiosity in their direction. "Hey, James, what are his folks doing to him? Forcing him to learn how to paint?" The watchman stepped back up to their side, his grin widening at the question. "Force him? They can't keep him away from it. He and I are good pals, and he's a lonely little fella who chats with me whenever he can. Did you hear what he said? This Blaisdell fellow is one of the finest painters in the country. He met Nathan at Mr. Orbit's house one day and took a liking to him. He lets Nathan come to his studio and watch him work, and now he's giving him regular lessons. Are you heading back for a stroll? I'll take the other side of the street." "No, we're going to check in and see what arrangements Mr. Orbit has made for the funeral." McCarty touched Marcus's sleeve. "See you later." "Catch you later," James nodded, then crossed over to the opposite sidewalk while his former companions resumed their path. "You really didn't get much from him," Marcus commented. "I got what I needed, information about some of the families and their servants," McCarty replied. "I didn't want to press him too much on the first go, and besides, we don't have more time to spend with him right now." "Are you going to confront that guy again?" Marcus asked innocently. "I'm going to confront every last one of them." McCarty's lips pressed together firmly as he quickened his pace. "I want to speak with Orbit too, before the inspector delivers the news." When they rang the bell, the door was quickly opened by a chubby little Chinese boy, his round, yellow face brimming with smiles. Seeing them, he bowed deeply, arms outstretched, and welcomed them into a large, dimly lit room to the left, where their footsteps echoed on the bare, intricately designed mosaic floor. McCarty noted that the entire opposite wall was glass, curving outward like a grand bow window. It was filled with an array of strange, vibrant flowering plants, unlike anything either of them had seen before, and a delicate, elusive fragrance lingered in the warm air. To their right, in the back, the slender pipes of a massive organ rose up. Stone benches and settles were scattered around, backed by towering masses of palms and cacti, but the echoing, high-ceilinged room held no other furnishings. They settled onto the nearest marble bench, and McCarty, beginning to sweat, pulled out his handkerchief to wipe his forehead. "It's just like that grand funeral home where the Large held Corcoran service." Marcus spoke normally at first, but his voice quickly dropped to a raspy whisper as it echoed around them. "Good heavens, did you hear that? It's worse than a tunnel." "SHH, the little rascal is still hanging around," McCarty scolded. "Come here, son." The little boy who had lingered in the doorway smiled, and quietly approached in his soft, embroidered slippers. "My name is Ling Sunny," he declared. "Oh, you're the coffee boy," McCarty recalled his talk with the butler. "Yes," Ling Sunny nodded eagerly at being recognized. "And is Wei Anya your father?" McCarty disregarded the difference in their last names. "Wei Anya uncle," he struggled with the word, clearly trying hard to be understood. "Uncle, is he?" McCarty hesitated. "Do you know Griffith?" The boy's round face darkened. "I catch Mr. Griffith. I don't like. Mr. Griffith gone away, I glad." "That," Marcus said wisely, "was straightforward. I couldn't have said it better myself if I'd known the little scamp." Ling Sunny hung his head shyly, but McCarty took out a shiny new quarter and held it out. "You buy yourself some of those nuts with raisins inside, Litchi. But first, tell me why you don't like Griffith." The small, claw-like hand eagerly grabbed the coin. "When Honorable Great Lord comes, Mr. Griffith say Ling Sunny very nice boy. When Honorable Lord not come, Mr. Griffith kicks, strikes, hurts head, always says Ling Sunny go hell." The little boy kicked out his foot suggestively and rubbed his ear in a realistic way. "That dirty hound, abusing and cursing a little kid, heathen or not," Marcus exclaimed. "Who's the Honorable Lord, kid? Mr. Orbit?" Again, Ling Sunny nodded, and a look of adoration lit up his little face. "Yes, Honorable Lord Orbit very great man, just like Lord High Prince." "So that's settled. We know where he stands with the kid." McCarty jumped in as Marcus was about to speak again, but it was clear Ling Sunny had found a topic that suited him. "Wei Anya caught Lisler Griffith in the act," he said, rolling up the sleeve of his embroidered silk jacket to reveal fresh, angry marks from 5 thick fingers on his plump arm. "Wei Anya Getty Niffy can do." Ling Sunny swept his hand across his throat, and Marcus shuddered. "For the love of the saints." "When did this happen?" McCarty asked, making sure to keep his tone casual. Yes. Yesterday." Ling Sunny nodded vigorously. "The Honorable Lord came and took the knife away from Wei Anya, said it couldn't be done, police would come. He said Lisler Griffith hurt Ling Sunny then left. Lisler Griffith is gone. The Honorable Lord is a great man." He glanced down at the coin, then back up with a sudden idea. "Litchi nuts can't be done. Slippers can do. Slippers with the Honorable Lord." He gestured toward his feet, and Marcus turned confused eyes to his friend. "Does the kid mean he wants to buy a pair of slippers for Orbit?" Ling Sunny's expression confirmed it, and Marcus suggested, "Surely he must have plenty of slippers, right?" Ling Sunny shook his head firmly. "Ali Blurn, Bang Bang Flyer Honorable Lord's loom. Little Flyer, Great Big Bang Bang, slippers by the chair, all same Blurn." "I've got it," McCarty whispered excitedly. To the little boy, whose dark, bright, slanting eyes were fixed on him as if seeking approval, he added, "Sure, son. Get your Honorable Lord a pair of slippers, and if you find any for a quarter, let me know where. Now run and tell him that 2 of the men who were here last night want to speak to him. Can you make him understand what you mean?" "Honorable Lord Speaky, Ty and me here," Marcus unexpectedly translated. The child nodded seriously. "Can do, Honorable Lord Talky my talk." With a final bow, he turned and trotted out of the room, and Marcus murmured, Can you believe that? Orbit speaks Chinese. That kid was going on about the fire last night, but what did he mean by bang bang? Do you think someone fired a shot? Absolutely not, McCarty snapped, his patience wearing thin. Something blew up in Orbit's room and ignited a chair and the slippers underneath it, but that's beside the point. Ling Sunny is a clever child, filled with charm that I wish his uncle possessed. Just yesterday, that way Anya nearly attacked Griffith for treating the boy poorly, but Orbit intervened. Ling Sunny has just been told that Griffith is gone, and he believes Orbit dismissed him, which is why he holds him in such high regard. I wonder if Wei Anya tried again. I also wonder if he's ever heard of the Tunis bean.